So lovely to see so many people here for Death Together. Death Together officially opened last night, and my jaw really aching because we had a fantastic Gavin Lilly, who's a deaf comedian, and he was just hilarious. So that's why my jaw's aching from struggling to speak. Really, it should be silent, and I wouldn't have this problem with the jaw aching because he was that funny. So it was wonderful to see deaf and hearing people being in a space that felt very safe and very comfortable, and you know, something that I have been or had a vision of seeing this happening in Cardiff. So I look hungover, I promise you, I'm not hungover. You asked me, I asked the question, what's the question? Why am I doing it? Why is that together? Why are we here? Why is it so important? I kind of said I've been working with Chapter for 2 years, but it goes way back before this. I realised that growing up and not really having very fully access to the art is something that I really wanted. And all the barriers that I faced, I went on the journey talking to deaf people in Wales, and I made so many connections with deaf people, the barriers, the problems, and continue to fight to have our rights to enjoy the art. And you know, I made a show about it. I've been on the radio, I've done workshops, I've spoken, I've done a lot of things. So this now is kind of the pinnacle of what I want to do. Because I've done it on my own, and I am fucking tired. I'm really tired, you know. I'm not just physically tired, I'm mentally tired of just almost trying to say, where are you guys? I'm really kind of hoping that it's a really big conversation that we need to have deaf allies. We need to have people to support, giving the opportunity for deaf people to flourish. And ironically, this funding we got is called Connect and Flourish. Connect, because I want to connect with partners. I'm very grateful to have the partners with me. And to flourish. We need to flourish. And that is such a great funding. I'm very thankful for our Council of Wales to give me, myself, Chapter, the opportunity to do this. Yes, I kind of said we got 4 brilliant keynote speakers, so I'm really excited to have them all here. So the first one we're doing is called, I've written it down somewhere, the topic is, BSL, why we need it and why we need it now. I'm very, very excited to have this Rob Wilks, who will be speaking in this. I have a very a relationship with Rob, because it was Rob who taught me about my right. Because many years ago, fresh from university, I applied for a job, and I got a job for photography, a very simple job, and I got the job. I was really impressed. I thought, brilliant, I got the job, and really excited. And only that day, kind of phoned my mum, actually, saying, we just realised you cannot use the phone. So we cannot give him the job. I thought, oh, wow. And then at that point then, I realised, I got the job, but they're now saying I can't have the job because I can't use the phone. Now, somebody at charity, I can't remember who I contacted, got me in touch with Rob. Rob then, who was working at the time as I believe a lawyer at the time, I can't remember. I think it was a lawyer at the time, and he told me about my right. And of course, I won. We went to court, I won, I got compensated, but it put me on that journey. It put me on that journey to think about my right. My right to be included, my right to get into to do anything that I wanted. Definitely don't have the right. So I'm really grateful to have Rob and come up on stage and talk about our rights at BSL Act and why it's really important. So thank you, Rob. It's been great to have you out here.
Hello everyone, it's lovely to meet you all, and thank you for that introduction. It's the best one I've had for a while. It really brought some tears to my eyes. So, thank you for that lovely introduction, Johnny. So, my name is Wilks, my name is Robert is, and I am a lecturer at university, and I teach students about law, and for them to become solicitors themselves. And I really enjoy teaching law. And when Johnny asked me whether I'd like to do a presentation in regard to the BSL Act in Wales, I said yeah, because it's one of my favourite topics anyway. And language acquisition is really important to me. So BSL Act for Wales, just to let you know, we don't actually have one at the moment. So we will talk about why we need it and why we need it now. So what's the issue? Why do we need it now? Because in Wales, we have lots of issues within the community. Some of you will be aware of all of the barriers, and those barriers have existed for years. There's been research, and the number of deaf people who are unemployed compared to the general population is higher. And that's, UK-wide, but also in Wales. But it's worse in Wales compared to England. And the famous statistic, so deaf school leavers, aged 16, tend to have an average reading age of 8. And those statistics have been consistent since the 70s. So academics, have researched again and again, and that hasn't improved, the gap hasn't reduced. So when you've got deaf school leavers leaving with a reading age of 8, I mean, my daughter's 8. It's shocking. So the GCSE levels for deaf students are a much lower level, and it becomes a problem because of the education system. And the reason for this was because of the Milan Conference in 1880, which basically created the policies of mainstreaming deaf children. So they don't have an opportunity to learn BSL, they don't have an opportunity to develop a deaf identity, and to have that language acquisition. So that's what is the result when they leave school. And with regard to justice and access to the legal system, there are so many barriers. There's very few deaf lawyers in the UK. And again, fewer again who can actually sign. So if someone's been discriminated against or they want to sue, again, they're facing a lot of barriers. And with regard to criminal law, again, it's about access. And people can end up in prison and have a double sentence because of the isolation they experience through not being able to communicate. And also health, poor health. Compared to the general population, deaf people have poor health outcomes. So those are the issues, that's why we need a BSL Act. But with regard to Wales specifically, I wanted to talk about why we have specific problems here. We have no specialist schools for deaf pupils in Wales. We have deaf units. So I've got 3 children, 2 of whom are deaf, and they attend a unit within a mainstream school. But I have concerns with regard to their future. How are they going to develop a deaf identity? How will their BSL skills develop? Because we don't have the provision in Wales. They might have to go to England where there are schools for deaf children. So when a deaf child is diagnosed or identified when they're born, families don't have access to BSL to learn to communicate with their child. There's not enough interpreters, and there's also not enough translators. I think altogether there's about 25 in the whole of Wales, so that's north and south. And in North and Mid Wales, it's very difficult to find interpreters. and mental health provision. So if someone is sectioned and needs to be sent to specialist mental health services, they have to go to England, either Manchester or Birmingham. So then, you know, they're separated from their family here in Wales. University courses, you know, there aren't any in BSL or deaf studies. So a deaf person who's interested and wanting to learn more or develop their BSL to a higher level have to go to England or Scotland. And also legal advice, as Johnny mentioned earlier, there isn't any in Wales, because obviously now I've moved on to the academic world, and unfortunately there isn't a specialist legal advice here, because, you know, I'm not doing it anymore. So thinking about the UK generally, there's disadvantages, but I think in Wales the situation is worse, so it's worth keeping that in mind. So we don't have a BSL Act in Wales at the moment. So there's been sort of campaigns. There's, you know, plenty of information here with regard to kind of work that's been done since 1999. More recently, in 2019, DEFO, which is a Deaf Youth Forum, who are based in Swansea, they submitted a petition to the Senedd with regard to demanding access to education in BSL. And they were successful in their petition. It was discussed in the Senedd, and it was agreed that action needed to be taken, but nothing happened. And then in 2021, Mark Isherwood, some of you might know Mark, a member of the Senedd, MS. He has an interest in deaf issues. He has a deaf daughter himself, and he's hard of hearing himself. So he submitted a proposal at the Senedd to try and generate interest in the BSL Act. And the Senedd was supportive and passed the motion, but obviously the government needed to take the lead on that, and nothing happened. And Mark Isherwood again in 22 wanted to put pressure on the government and submitted a motion, which again had overwhelming support. The government this time contacted the British Deaf Association to create an audit report and said that they would act on receipt of that. I know that that has now been published, and the government are now looking into how to progress. So with regard to the motion in 2022, the actual sort of wording of what they wanted considered as sort of a bill, an act, is quite interesting. They were proposing a BSL commissioner, because you know we have a Welsh language commissioner. So it would mean that they would have power to fine people, you know, like the Welsh Language Commissioner, if they're not offering bilingual services. So if we had a BSL Commissioner in Wales, there's potential for similar powers. So if services aren't being provided in BSL, there could be some actual access, and that would change the world for deaf people. And the motion also discussed education in BSL. At the moment, we're waiting for the government to inform us what the next steps are and what they plan to do. They've kind of tasked a disability rights task force into looking at the next steps. And the other thing that's worth mentioning, with regard to the education system, the curriculum in Wales now includes BSL. Some of you might not know that, but from September last year, all schools in Wales can teach hearing children sign language as part of the curriculum. So there's different elements of that, and I won't go in depth to it, but so you have English and Welsh that all schools must teach. So you have a bilingual system, and there's Welsh language provision. I mean, if your parents have children in Wales, you'll know that every council area have Welsh medium schools in primary and secondary level, so a parent can decide to send their child to a Welsh-speaking school. So that's separate, but we have international languages on the curriculum, so French, German, Spanish, etc., that can be taught at primary and secondary level. And now they've included BSL to that list. But it causes its own issues because we don't have enough BSL teachers in Wales, so who's going to teach that? But it's a problem that can be solved. So we need to look at how we can resolve those issues. But with the curriculum, there's a model there that the Welsh Government can adopt. So, just things to bear in mind. So, in terms of what's next, the BDA, in their audit report, they made some recommendations. And it seems that the government want to focus on those specific recommendations. So we're waiting for the government to decide what to do and to inform us what action it will take. The recommendations were that we need a BSL Act. Of course, we've known that for years. We've been campaigning for it since 1999. So we're hoping the government will listen. But interestingly, within the report, that it said that all deaf people in Wales should have full citizenship. So that's an interesting concept, and it'd be interesting to see how that would work. And obviously, it said statistics need to be collected. And Welsh Government are very keen, they want their work to be evidence-based. So they want the information before they act. When you talk about full citizenship, what does that mean? Break that concept down. Protecting social, cultural citizenship. And we need to go back to education and the issues that deaf people have with education. There's opportunities there to make changes, and really that's the area of work that I'm really interested in, because I have 2 deaf daughters. So I'm really interested in deaf education. Making sure that all hearing families of deaf children are able to learn sign language. Increase the number of interpreters, so that will have more strength. Reframe how deaf people are considered. Because at the moment, they're still categorised as a disability group, that they need to be provided with reasonable adjustments, communication support, but need to be reframed as a linguistic minority. And to establish a BSL working group to sort of guide the government on working on changes for deaf people. And the Disability Rights Task Force to see what action they will take next. So when we talk about deaf disability language, there's been a lot of research in this area. Historically, it's been a lot of either or. So you're either deaf with a big D or you're disabled, you can't be both. So, you can be small D deaf, big D deaf, but you can't be both at the same time. There's been a lot of focus in that area, but the research is shifting. And the terminology is shifting, especially with regard to intersectionality. So it's potentially for people to have multiple identities, and they shift depending on the context and the situation. So it's worth keeping that in mind. It's about language rights. It's about disability rights. I think you can pick and choose depending on the context and the situation. So with regard to deaf and disability rights and with language minority rights, there's been different influences with regard to the law. So, I mean, you can see within the Equality Act in the UK, that focuses on deaf and disability rights and protects people from discrimination. People can sue and challenge using the Equality Act. And there's an expectation that society's attitudes would change. It would change, you know, you're not allowed to discriminate. You know, encourage people to think, actually, my behaviour is not appropriate, I need to make changes. With regard to the language minority rights, you know, it's about being accepted as a language. In Wales, as a perfect example, you know, previously Welsh wasn't accepted. But over the years, you know, the law has been updated and become stronger and stronger. So that now people have rights. With regard to international law, the UN and the Council of Europe have a law with regard to language minority rights. And a sign language recognition law. And that's kind of under the umbrella of linguistic minority rights. So you can normally challenge through the courts with deaf and disability rights, but not with language rights. We don't have the power to sue. So it could be argued that it's just tokenism. You know, oh, we recognise your language, we accept you have a language, and then, you know, go and get on with it. We don't have any rights. So yeah, you accept my language, but on an everyday basis, there's a struggle and a campaign. So we need work in that area. So there's been so many issues, and that's why we need a BSL Act, because of the barriers that people face. You know, we haven't achieved equality. And a lot of that is because of the focus on sort of deaf and disability rights, and they're not strong enough. We need the addition of linguistic rights. And especially with intersectionality, I think both can coexist and can be used at the same time. Because deaf BSL users are still deaf. They still have issues around hearing. But I think there's been too much focus on the disability rights rather than the linguistic rights.
Okay, so I want to talk more about this now with the Act, okay, the Equality Act. So there's a lot of details in the Act. It's a really complex document, obviously. Okay, so just looking at some of the positives and the negatives of it. So I've done quite a lot of research on the Equality Act, and there's been a lot of positive change. You know, a lot of public bodies have got responsibilities. And the research is that, you know, on a local level, there's been an impact. You know, councils have made plans and new systems to achieve equalities for people within local systems. There's also been really good examples of case law regarding BSL English interpreters, and that is, you know, a positive change for deaf BSL users. So there's some positives there. There's also negatives. It really relies on that medical model of disability, focus very much on the fact that there is something wrong with people's ears, you know? And that's fine, it's useful in some places, but you know, that's not what the entire problem is. So the medical model really tries to focus on making deaf people the same as hearing people, fixing their deafness. Okay, it doesn't talk about deaf identity, it doesn't talk about language, it doesn't talk about culture, you know, and that's an issue. Also, you know, it's very much individual enforcement model. So, you know, it's one person, I've been discriminated against, I need to take action. You know, and that's difficult. It's difficult to challenge things, it's exhausting, you know. We talked before about the fact that deaf people have difficulty accessing legal systems, etc. So if we're relying on that individual enforcement model, you know, it's doubly difficult. I always talk about the single one-off adjustments. You know, they may be reasonable. A one-off change, that's fine, but that doesn't mean then that there's a repetitive access for everybody. So that's less achievable. So having an interpreter for one person who wants to go to one event is great, but then providing access for every show is maybe more difficult. So that's negative. So it's less likely to happen because it's not reasonable, not seen as reasonable within the Act. And that's a problem. So that's the Equality Act. Now if you think about language minority rights, okay, before we talk about what's happening here in the UK, okay, in the Act, in London and in Scotland, okay, let's have a look a bit wider around the world. Let's start with New Zealand. Yeah, it's quite similar to Scotland in a way. So 2016, so what's that, 17 years? So New Zealand has an act, it's quite a strong act. New Zealand Sign Language is an official language of New Zealand in the same way that Maori is, okay? It also gives deaf people a right to use New Zealand Sign Language within the legal system, okay? So you can bring interpreters into court. And government departments have a responsibility to encourage the use of New Zealand Sign Language. That's part of the Act within New Zealand. It was reviewed in 2011, and people were saying they were very confident, but they weren't saying that individual departments were doing the right thing in terms of encouraging the use of New Zealand Sign Language. So, you know, it's successful in patches. Okay, it's not perfect. Now, in Finland have sort of two legal systems. They have constitutional and legislative law. So, Finnish Sign Language is available in both parts of the law. So deaf people in Finland have a right to use the sign language in all of that law. Okay, so it's legally recognised in both parts of law, which gives it a lot of strength. But in terms of the research I've done, there's not much impact. So deaf schools in Finland rather have almost all disappeared. Okay, they've got problems with interpreters, etc. So it's not perfect. Ireland, I think they've given a lot of rights to people using Irish Sign Language. Access to public services, access to court systems, etc., statutory systems for interpreters, statutory recognition. So there's a lot of rights in Ireland, which is brilliant. But, okay, there's a lot of people who aren't very happy because systems seem to be getting ignored there. So again, in terms of the actual impact on the coalface, it's limited. Now I missed out Brazil. What about Brazil? 2003, sign language was recognized in Brazil. Okay, so Brazilian Sign Language, okay, Libra. And they give deaf children the right to use sign language throughout education. Okay, so that means that deaf children, okay, since 2003, have had that right to education, which means the number of deaf people gaining degrees in Brazil has shot up in the last 20 years. And when I look at that system, I think, wow, that's the impact. That's the impact we want, because that's the impact on deaf people that we need. And that's an area that I really want to do some more research into. So we talk about language minority rights. Okay, we talk about identity, protected identity. So what's my identity? I've got lots of identities. Okay, I'm small d deaf. Okay, I'm a hearing aid user. I grew up oral. I'm capital D deaf sometimes. I'm proud to be using sign language. I'm disabled because I claim PIP. Okay, I claim personal independence payment, so I'm classed as disabled. Okay, more money in my pocket. I'm white. Okay, I'm Welsh. I'm British. I'm a husband. I'm a father. I'm a lawyer. I'm a lecturer. I'm an academic. I have lots of identities. And there are different laws that protect those identities. They might be equality laws. They might be other types of laws. But the capital D deaf, my cultural identity, my language usage, as a BSL user, I'm not protected. And that's why there are still barriers, that's why there are still problems. Because those two identities are missing from the protection. So if we talk about the sign language recognition and the Act in Scotland, okay? So let's talk about the Act in 2015. Okay, great. All right. The aim was to encourage people to use and understand more about BSL. And it put certain responsibilities on the government to put out a national plan in regard to BSL. So the BSL strategy was required, and then it was published, and councils and courts and various systems had to look at it, education had to look at it, further education, and they all had to produce their own plan of how to use BSL and how that would link with the national plan. Okay, that seems good. So the first plan is almost finished. Okay, and we're coming up towards the review and the second plan. So again, let's have a look at the positives and the negatives. So the national plan that was created, that was good. It was done in consultation with the deaf community. Again, you know, they used all sorts of areas like Facebook things. People put all sorts of views through, opinions about what they liked, what they didn't like, what they wanted involved. And that was good because that plan then fed into the local plans. So the local plans make it more effective and hopefully have more impact locally. Okay. These plans were very focused on language. So we're talking about BSL as a language rather than just generally communication tools. You know, we're talking about BSL as an identity, having respect for that capital D deaf identity. Some bodies, organisations did it better than others. Okay, so you know, University of Edinburgh, for example, you know, some of them brought in experts on BSL. Some of them really consulted deaf people a lot. They did a lot of studies, etc. So University of Edinburgh is one example. Now the negatives. There were no new rights. Okay, so and that means there's no enforcement mechanism. So it was very dependent on what the government at the time, agenda and priorities were. Because at the end of the day, it was their decision on what to include and what not to include. Now, that first plan, as I say, is coming up for review, so 6 years, and there's not much evidence of any change. So there's been no big, real impact. So that was Scotland. Okay, so last year, 2022, BSL Act in the UK government. Okay, so that's less than a year ago that was passed. Now, that's really interesting because it recognised BS as a language of England, Wales and Scotland. So of course the UK, the United Kingdom, includes Northern Ireland as well. But Northern Ireland is not included in the BSL Act because language is a devolved issue in Ireland. So Northern Ireland is separate in that instance. So, because of course in Northern Ireland they use BSL and Irish Sign Language as well. So really it's become a sort of Great Britain issue rather than including Northern Ireland as well. So how does this work? So the Secretary of State for the Department of Work and Pensions, okay, this is all really complicated, lots of letters here, okay. So Secretary of State for the DWP has to prepare a report, a BSL report, okay, every 3 years. So the first one was supposed to be the 3rd of April. What are we in now? Yeah, we're in May now, aren't we? Yeah, okay. So there's been a delay, I think, over bringing people into various boards and consultation, etc. So, okay, so we're expecting it anytime this year, hopefully. So the idea is they have to promote BSL, but I think it's quite limited. So each government department is supposed to have a minister responsible for the promotion of BSL within each department. Okay, they're then supposed to consult wider, but as you know, with the COVID briefings, etc., remember all the issue about COVID briefings and bringing in interpreters, and the UK government didn't do that. Boris Johnson stood at his podium and chatted with no interpreters. Wales did it, Scotland did it, Ireland did it, most of the world did it, to be fair. They had interpreters in the room with the world leaders, except for England. Okay, and there was a lot of fuss over that. Okay, and now, the BSL Act could change that. So, it seems like, Rishi Sunak didn't get the memo, but we'll see. So there's supposed to be a BSL council, BSL board. So this means that deaf people will have access through BSL because we're supposed to be having direct consultation with BSL people, BSL using people. So this all started last month. So positives and negatives. Well, first of all, at last, we've got a BSL recognised as a language. Okay. And the BSL Council, is supposed to oversee implementation and future changes. Okay. How much power the BSL Council will actually have is questionable. In theory, they could be ignored. And the negatives are, it's not an official language. Now, that's not so much of a problem because there actually aren't any official languages. English isn't an official language of the UK. It's the main language. It's the main language used. But actually, legally, it's not the official language. So, it could be argued that we're better off or worse off, but it's not an official language. The Act itself doesn't actually mention deaf people. Okay, that's really interesting. It talks about BSL users. And again, that could be a good thing because it's focusing on the language rather than the disability, like I was saying before. It's focusing on the language, so that could be seen as a good thing. Now, in similar ways to Scotland, we'd hope that they would have instill in more rights, etc., but it hasn't. Okay, so that means that there's no enforcement mechanisms, you can't sue through it at the moment. Okay, there should be consultation with deaf community, but there wasn't, so it may not reflect what deaf people locally want. That may change in the future, we'll see. One major negative, the UK BSL Act does not cover devolved governments. So health, education, housing in Wales are devolved, and the BSL Act will not cover those. So that becomes the Welsh Government's responsibility. So you can see already there are gaps. There are important gaps happening. Okay, so the BSL Act doesn't cover those devolved issues. So my first thoughts. Okay, so the BSL Act could help. It could help local authorities. It certainly could help in terms of helping deaf people's rights. In terms of recurring changes and excess, I don't know. But they could use the BSL Act now to use that as an argument for recurring changes, because we have to remember now that BSL is a linguistic issue, it's a language issue, and if you don't provide for that, it's a problem. It's a private members bill here, so that means there's no funding attached to it. Okay, so it's not associated to a department, it's not associated to its own group of staff, etc. So it's giving responsibilities to people, but there's no funding in which to actually fulfill those responsibilities. Possibly, the BSL Act, the emergence of the BSL Act, will aid in changing society views. Okay, so hopefully society may see deaf people as a language minority group. I don't think there's going to be large-scale change. I don't think we're going to see massive boom moments. It will be more like slow creeping changes with small moments of awareness, but yeah, I don't think we're going to see a massive earth-shattering change. The new BSL Council could be important and influential, we will see. For me to finish off, okay, I want to talk about what equality looks like. Okay, we talk about the barriers, we talk about what the problems are. How do we improve that? Okay, what do we need? Okay, so as part of my PhD, I had a look at what equality looks like. And there's lots and lots of different ways of explaining it and different law systems that exchange it. So the first picture here is a formal law, okay? The idea of treating everybody the same. Okay, so you can see what happens if you treat everybody the same on the far left of the screen there. There's a wall, everybody gets the same wall, and you deal with that. So the person who's tall gets to see no problem. The shorter people have a bit of an issue there. But that idea, that formal law, that idea of treating everybody the same, that's what we're looking at. So that's formal. Substantive equality. Okay, this is where we make adjustments. Okay, so this would be similar to the Equality Act. Okay, so we can achieve equality through adjustments. So, okay, we've got one person who can see, two who can't see properly, so what do? We put them on boxes, different size boxes, and that's great. Everybody can see, because we've now got boxes in place. That's substantive equality. The problem with that is because it's temporary. When they go home, okay, the boxes get taken away, and the next time they arrive, they have to ask, can I have the box, please, because I'm not tall enough to see over the wall. Okay? Is that really equality? If one person has to go and ask all the time. So the third option here is transformative. Okay? We know what the problem is. The problem is the wall. The problem is not the height of the people. So if we get rid of the wall, that's fine. Or maybe make it glass so you can see through it. Okay? If it needs to be there to stop people leaving or stop people getting somewhere, make it glass. Make a fence. But if you make it see-through, we remove the problem. And I think at the moment, we're in more formal. Substantive is there sometimes. Transformative is there hardly ever. And how do we get it? Unfortunately, we need to keep battling. We need more political representation. We need more people. I know there are barriers to getting that representation, okay? But, we need to get more people in the Senate, we need to have more people involved in elections, etc., okay? we need deaf leadership. Okay, we need more deaf role models. Okay, so they can lead the community forward. We need to campaign together. Okay, here particularly we need to campaign. Okay, in England now, you know, they have campaigned. We haven't done that so much in Wales to the Senedd. We need more research. Okay, I'm trying to do it, but I can't do everything. Okay, we need to research the issues, and we need to just keep battling and keep fighting. So our conclusions are, we know there are barriers there. We know there are barriers. We know some situations are worse than in England and Scotland. We know the gaps are there in services. The campaigns carry on. Okay, I know Mark Ishwood tried really, really hard at the MS. Brilliant. But we know we need to make sure that we understand the difference between deaf disabled and language minority. Okay, so we need to make sure that we are clear on what our rights are. There's been a lot of research over sort of the impact of sign language and the lack of sign language, and that would help. Okay. Okay, I mean, I mentioned Brazil earlier. You know, we need to look at good practice around the world and think about how we can learn from that. We need to look at the acts in Scotland, the positives and negatives of that act, and we can learn from that. And we need more transformative equality. We need to fight for it. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ross, for that brilliant speech. Someone like me who doesn't really understand the legal system and really want to understand why it's important to be at that act and the right. So thank you very much. I mean, I know the legal system can be complicated and difficult, but my big question is, I know we're running out of time here, and my big question is, I've seen all the research that you've done and got everything in place. What's going on? Why is it not happening now?
Okay, I'll respond to that. It's the billion-dollar question, really. You know, why isn't it happening? I think really it's about government priorities. So with regards to the BSL Act, it was a private members bill. It wasn't backed by any funding. It was Ros Cooper, and she's retired now, herself is a child of deaf adults, and she was very motivated and passionate about it and introduced it. So it was kind of picked out of a ballot to be introduced, and she had cross-party support. So it was perfect timing. So it was just after Rose had won strictly, and so there was a kind of, you know, national awareness of BSL, and that helped. The MP what was the question again? Okay, BSL Act, right, why not? Welsh Government, it's not their priority at the moment. I think, you know, if we had the right person in the job who was responsible for quality, you know, and they were prioritising deaf rights with regards to communication rather than, you know, but not looking at language, I think there was a lack of understanding. You know, in Wales we have the Welsh language, so you would think that people would understand better, but they don't. But potentially they think there's not enough room for both Welsh and BSL and English. Why not enough room? Well, it's about the money, isn't it? It's about the funding. You know, so there's been the establishment and the promotion of Welsh medium schools and the funding that's been spent on doing that. Maybe they feel that BSL is an addition they can't afford.
Thank you for clarifying that. I mean, I have a lot of questions floating in my head. I'm sure the audience got a lot of questions. we could talk about it all day. But unfortunately, we're going to have to keep moving on because we have 3 other keynote speakers. But please keep those thoughts in your head. We, around the building, we have posters, lots of different posters, I think, and if you have thoughts or something, please write on them. Write what you think. What does it mean for you, all of this stuff, you know? And then, or put it on Twitter and hashtag stuff together, and just keep that conversation going. I think Rob's going to be around for a bit, so I'm very happy for any questions.
Yeah, for a while.
During the break. We're going to have a break, I think, for 10 minutes because we need a wee, maybe grab some water, and then I'd love everyone to come back, maybe say 12:15. Is that good with everyone for the last presentation? Fab, thank you again for all the good speech. Thank you.